Today I want to read from one of my favorite passages in the book, Turning Within, Reclaiming Your Soul from Shadow. It's available paperback, Audible, Kindle, anywhere you pick up written word. Today's passage is page 176, and I'm talking about the construct, and we're specifically talking about the facet story in the sections called How the Mind Protects. Think of your narrative or plot as your internal AI's interpretation of the now, and the possible scenarios or outcome trees it can consider based on your past experience. This is where the character you is in the flow of the story. For example, if I'm addicted to a lower identity, my stories always have suffering at the core. The survival-hijacked mind runs scenario, plotting suffering to avoid what may happen. The mind begins to associate more and more confidence in the belief that this identity is important by plotting and navigating from the possibility of its validity. Therefore, the more you believe something, the more realized that something becomes. This is where life gets dicey, because we do need the mind to help keep us safe. Repeat after me. Thank you, mind, for keeping me safe. Remember, your mind is hijacked for survival. This subroutine can be seen at every level of thought. This means occasionally you get hijacked by your mind because your mind operates on its need to survive, whether you like it or not. Occasionally the mind keeps a judgment or wound from your conscious thought. Remember, the first rule of shadow work is that we lie to ourselves first. The mind performs to keep us from wrestling with experiences that are too heavy from the weight of our self-judgment. Plot after storyline, scene after scenario, all created from surviving the looming judgment we can feel but cannot find. Because the mind is divided, it wrestles with the problem while protecting itself from the source. Left untended, the battle rages within us while we surface dwellers are left victimized by it. We are caught in a double bind. Each scenario or mind created makes the identity more calcified, more realized and conditioned. This storyline we embrace receives more validation and is the likely default construct we use to build the new meaning. Why? Because to the mind it just makes sense. Even when we win, the victory is short-lived and in some ways has made it worse. The mind takes on the shape of your desired construct. Solving a problem and simultaneously living with the certainty of the problem only causes the mind to find another reason to suffer. Therefore, you validate the belief you're trying to invalidate by using it to navigate your life. You've created a landmark to navigate, and that landmark becomes the one you're requiring to find your way. The mind leverages any meaning made to store it and make sense of all other meaning. Just like drops of water make up the ocean, so every construct developed makes up the holographic of your mind. Let's consider this in a different scenario. Are you able to understand the statement, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths," and how it makes sense now? In the mind, a coward dies repeatedly. Just as when I'm operating from one of my lower identities, I witness my demise hundreds of times an hour. It's simple. My coward doesn't stand a chance compared to the lightning-fast reaction time of my well-associated and referenced victim identity. This still remains a part of my work. Our minds flow in story form, and it will run whatever scenario it's poised. Just as a tree falls the way it leans, a mind makes stories the way it's programmed. Athletes have used this concept to perform on the field of play. Performers, when they go on stage, it is consciously using the mind to run the perfect scenario. Napoleon Hill coined this creative visioning. By training your mind consciously to run the scenarios you want to experience, you become more likely to experience the specific scenario in real life. Why? Because to the mind it just makes sense. The mind desires to stick with what it knows. This form of reflecting, imagining different scenarios, and reviewing different possibilities sets us apart from other animals. What if you only told yourself stories worth telling? How would you change by changing your story? Playing the hero and not the victim. Stop for a moment and contemplate these questions. What is the quality of outcomes you give yourself permission to anticipate? Do you anticipate a good day when you wake up? Look at your relationships, such as your work life or your intimate relationships. Take a moment, stop, and notice how and what you anticipate in your day-to-day. Notice the difference between having faith in positive versus negative outcomes. The story is the framework all narrative is wired to flow in. It answers the question, what's the point? Your mind is always asking this question. Always and always. Every character has a story. Given that you've got multiple identities or perspectives within you, you also have multiple stories running through you at any given time. There's no if about this. It's a matter of how you're unconsciously telling yourself a story. It's interesting to me to note that Joseph Campbell studied every culture all the way back to the beginning of time, and he found a common theme in every myth, every religion, every deep felt spiritual story. And when we look at TV and radio and book, there's always a theme of a certain flow to story. And if every culture, every religion, every human really has been told the same flow, the same current of expectation, wouldn't it seem extremely logical that we have unconsciously developed a pattern, an archetype of story that we can all plug into and leverage to rewire our experience? It's not a matter of if you're telling yourself a story. It's a matter of do you know how and what the story is that you tell yourself. What are you programmed to believe about yourself? How do you anticipate your day? If you're going to tell yourself a story, and you are telling yourself stories, tell stories worth telling. Have a great day.